Let's talk about the end of Robert Browning's poem My Last Duchess, which I think is in some ways the most difficult part, and you could also argue the most interesting. At this point, let's scroll down a little bit here. So at this point, the Duke is, there we go, is saying, who would stoop to blame this sort of trifling? In other words, he has been very unhappy with the Duchess for thinking that lots of things are equal, whether it's his love token or the way in which she sees a sunset, let's say. She's not discriminating enough, right? She doesn't have the same sense of aristocratic taste that he does. And he's basically saying, I don't want to stoop to blame this sort of trifling. So to stoop is to bend down to come to somebody else's level. And a trifle is something insignificant. So he's really saying the Duchess is one to trifle, to deal with small little things like a bough of cherries, let's say, which mean nothing compared to my 900 years old name, right? I'm not going to come down to her level and stoop. He says, even had you skill in speech, which I have not, and we've seen throughout that he constantly kind of says, I'm not a great talker, I don't have rhetoric, and yet we know he's controlling the conversation. But as he says this, the other interesting part here is that he's kind of saying, I don't really want to talk to her about it because, that would be below my level, but maybe subconsciously he's also realizing that there's actually nothing to critique. There's nothing wrong with what she's doing. She simply loves life. She loves other people. And if he had to confront her, he would actually just have to show and demonstrate his own snobbishness, which might be a good thing in that case. Now, as he goes on here, he suggests possible different ways in which he could talk to his wife, his first wife. The first one would be to make your will quite clear to such a one and say, just this or that and you disgust me, here you miss or there exceed the mark. Right? So if he does talk to her, then one of these outcomes would be, and if she let herself be less than so. So this would be a kind of obedient response. If the Duchess acted obediently and said, yes, master, lord, husband, however she would address him, and let herself be taught, that would be one possible outcome. But the other possible outcome would be that she would plainly set her wits to his. And wits here are mental faculties. So setting your wits against somebody else is to have a battle of wits, to have an argument. So that would be the other outcome. And the Duke obviously doesn't like a lack of predictability, so he's worried that if he does have that conversation with his first wife, he can't control the outcome. So it's better just to remain silent and deal with it in a different way. He goes on, he says, nor plainly set her wits to yours, forsooth, that's kind of affirming, right, in truth, and made excuse. So if she did have a battle of wits, she might have made an excuse for why she was always smiling at people and always happy and always looking around. Even then would be some stooping. Even if you did have this particular argument, whatever the outcome, there would be some stooping. And he says, I choose never to stoop. All right. This is obviously also a hint to the visitor to say, okay, we're going to negotiate a dowry here. I'm not going to come down to a particular level. I'm going to be a hard bargainer. And he's hinting at all of this by talking about the portrait of his last Duchess. He continues, oh, sir, she smiled, no doubt, whenever I passed her. But who passed without much the same smile? This grew. I gave commands, then all smiles stopped together. There she stands as if alive. The first thing to notice here is just how choppy the language is, right? So you can kind of see here that we have all these short, curt little statements, and that expresses the suddenness of his commands as well. After lots of flowing lines, the Duke basically said, enough is enough. I'm going to deal with it somehow. And he gave these mysterious commands, which, as we talked about before, suggests that he had her killed or maybe sent to a nunnery. It's not very clear which one it is, and of course the Duke wouldn't say it overtly to the marriage agent. That would be foolish. So he's really only saying, I made sure that she changed her behavior, that she was silent, and after she went away or died or whatever took place. Now she only lives on in art and is in a sense frozen in time, which is exactly what the Duke wants. The other thing that's interesting here is that he doesn't use a conjunction. Normally we would use a conjunction here, so we would say something like, and I gave commands. There's nothing grammatically wrong with this, of course, but poetically speaking, this is a device that's called a syndeton. A syndeton. There we go. And the critic W. David Shaw says that this use of a syndeton is a little bit reminiscent of when Julius Caesar famously said, I came, I saw, I conquered, right? Very famous line. And the Duke sounds equally imperious here. He really wants to impress people with the way in which he describes this. There's a marked contrast after this with how casual the line is as he goes on. So he says, then all smiles stop together. There she stands as if alive. Wilt please you rise, right? Why not get up? You've seen the painting. We'll meet the company below then, and so on. So the tone really shifts here as if the Duke is very skilled in suddenly being very casual and a little bit chummy here. Now, before we go on here, I should mention one more thing about this line, then all smiles stop together, which is a fascinating line, because normally we would say, then smiles stopped altogether. Right? That would be a much more natural way of saying this. And the unnatural syntax reflects, of course, also the Duke's actions, which are not kind or natural as well. The other thing this points out is that instead of saying that her smile stopped altogether, or other people's, the fact that all smiles stopped points out that even the Duke will not be happy now. Nobody around her will be happy. She was the sun in their lives, and by silencing her or killing her, the Duke has basically made everybody miserable, which is an interesting point about jealousy, right? How it corrupts everything and it just destroys people's happiness. Let's go on to the last section here then. He says, the Count your masters no munificence. So munificence here means generosity. Generosity. And the marriage agent, his boss, his master, is generous, the Duke says, is ample warrant. So a warrant is basically a grounds. The Duke is saying, I can assume that your master is generous, and this gives me grounds for thinking that no just pretense, that would be any sort of rightful claim. Okay, so a rightful claim, and the Duke is going to make a claim to a dowry, will be disallowed. In other words, I know that your count, your master, is so generous that if I ask for a decent dowry, a good amount of money when I get married, it's not going to get denied, right? It will not be disallowed. So this is, of course, very promising, and he's going to insist on it. But then he turns to flattery and he says, though this his fair daughter's self, as I avowed at starting, is my object. In other words, I really love her. I'm interested in her. That would be Barbara I, his second wife. And that is really what I'm after. You know, I'm not going to say no to a dowry. In fact, I'll insist on it, but I really care about her first. And of course, we know that that is far from the truth. As they go down together, possibly down the staircase in the palace, he says, notice Neptune, though, taming a seahorse, thought a rarity, which Klaus of Innsbruck cast in bronze for me. So this is a statue here, right? A statue of Neptune taming a seahorse. And he says it very casually, as if they're just passing it. But of course, he's also drawing attention to it. He's trying to impress the marriage agent and trying to make a point. So let's try to figure out what that point might be. Well, first of all, when he talks about this particular statue, he says it's a rarity. Now, of course, this could also refer back to Neptune, but I think the main meaning here is that the statue as a whole is thought a rarity, so Neptune and the seahorse, everything together here, which Klaus of Innsbruck cast in bronze for me. And we know that Barbara I was living in Innsbruck. We know that her brother, the Count of Tyrol, was there as well. So everything then is meant to impress the marriage agent, right? You're coming from Innsbruck. I know the best artist there. Let me show again what a great art connoisseur I really am. He also rhymes rarity with me, which is interesting because it suggests that he is equally fine, equally rare, and it's also a fitting conclusion for the poem because the whole poem has been about himself. Now, as we think of this image of Neptune and the seahorse a little bit more, it's helpful to look at some depictions in art. So first of all, in this photo of a 17th century statue of Neptune, you see Neptune taming a dolphin instead of a seahorse, but the effect is pretty much the same. You can also check out this particular mosaic. Here we have Neptune again. We know that in Roman times he was the god of the sea and of horses, not just a tiny fish, as some people seem to think, and he also typically carries a trident. So Neptune then is a very powerful figure who dominates and controls, and this is how the Duke sees himself as well. He seems to imply that he tried to tame his first wife. From that point of view, it's also interesting that she rode on a mule earlier in the poem, and now he is talking about taming horses. But in all of this, again, we have to emphasize the fact that he's only hinting at things, right? He's really showing I am a knowledgeable artist and hinting at taming his wife, but he never states anything too overtly. All right, the last thing I'll leave you with here is something you can look up yourself if you like. There's another famous portrait of the 16th century Renaissance Admiral Andrea Doria, and it shows Doria depicted as Neptune, very muscular. He's semi-nude. He's kind of gazing imperiously into the distance. So check it out yourself, and you can see that all of these depictions in art are very relevant to our poem because it shows that our Duke is trying to make the same impression.